Breaking news! Israel has taken an unprecedented step, reportedly targeting senior Hamas commanders not in Gaza or Lebanon, but inside Doha, Qatar. This shocking development has shaken the entire Middle East. The big question is Qatar becoming the next battlefield in Israel's war against Hamas? And how will this reshape global diplomacy? In today's video, we are breaking down this dramatic situation in full detail. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most dramatic and controversial developments in the Middle East in recent years. According to emerging reports, Israel has targeted Hamas commanders in Doha, Qatar. If confirmed, this marks a huge shift in Israel's military and intelligence strategy. Traditionally, Israel has carried out strikes or operations in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, or even Syria, but targeting inside Qatar, a wealthy Gulf state and a key hub of diplomacy, represents a new escalation that could carry enormous consequences. Qatar is not just another Middle Eastern country. It is home to Al Jazeera, hosts U.S. military bases, and plays the role of mediator between warring groups. Hamas has maintained political offices in Doha for years, with Qatari leadership often serving as a bridge between Hamas and Western nations during negotiations. If Israel has indeed taken action in Qatar, it means Israel is willing to break long-standing diplomatic boundaries in its pursuit of Hamas leadership. This move could be seen as a tactical success for Israel if high-level Hamas commanders were eliminated. However, it also risks sparking outrage across the Gulf states, creating diplomatic rifts, and possibly endangering Qatar's position as a mediator. Beyond that, it may lead to international backlash, with critics accusing Israel of destabilizing a neutral space. In this video, we will break down exactly how this situation developed, the history of Hamas in Qatar, and what this could mean for the future of Middle Eastern geopolitics. To understand why Israel might target Hamas leaders in Doha, we first need to look at the role of Hamas outside Gaza. While the movement is based primarily in Gaza, its political leadership operates internationally. For years, Doha has served as a safe haven where senior Hamas figures meet with diplomats and negotiate ceasefires. This arrangement was not accidental. Qatar deliberately positioned itself as a mediator, offering Hamas leaders a base while simultaneously maintaining ties with the United States, Europe, and Israel through back channels. Israel has tolerated this setup for years, even though it knew Hamas leadership was residing in Qatar. The logic was simple. As long as those leaders were accessible through diplomatic channels, Qatar could serve as a useful middleman during ceasefire talks. But the October 7th Hamas attacks against Israel and the subsequent war in Gaza seem to have shifted Israel's calculus. Now, Tel Aviv views Hamas's external leadership not just as negotiators, but as active decision makers responsible for deadly attacks. If Israel did indeed strike in Doha, the message is loud and clear: no Hamas leader is safe, no matter where they are. This is a dramatic escalation because it signals Israel's willingness to disregard Qatari sovereignty to achieve its goals. For Qatar, this puts it in an impossible position. On one hand, it has cultivated ties with Hamas for years. On the other, it risks becoming a direct target in Israel's war. This tension is precisely why the story is exploding globally. Qatar's relationship with Hamas is long and complicated. Since the early 2000s, Doha has provided financial aid, political support, and diplomatic cover to the movement. Billions of dollars in aid money for Gaza were funneled through Qatari channels, often with Israel's quiet approval, because the funds helped maintain stability in the Strip. But beyond money, Qatar gave Hamas something even more valuable: legitimacy. By hosting Hamas's political leaders, Qatar positioned itself as their primary backer on the world stage. Critics accuse Doha of being a sponsor of terrorism, while supporters argue that Qatar's role prevents Hamas from becoming isolated and radicalized further. In fact, many ceasefire deals between Israel and Hamas over the past decade were mediated through Qatari officials. This dual role, both ally to the West and supporter of Hamas, allowed Qatar to maintain its unique geopolitical leverage. However, if Israel has truly broken that arrangement by targeting Hamas leaders in Qatar, it represents the collapse of this delicate balance. Suddenly, Qatar's support for Hamas is no longer just a diplomatic question, but a potential national security threat. The Gulf monarchy could face pressure from its Western allies to distance itself from Hamas, even while facing outrage from regional populations who sympathize with the Palestinian cause. In short, this development puts Qatar in the global spotlight in ways it may not have anticipated. Israel's strategy is clear: cut off Hamas leadership everywhere, even if it means challenging Qatar directly. From Israel's perspective, this move fits into its broader strategy of decapitation, removing leadership figures to weaken an organization's ability to operate. Israel has used this strategy many times before, targeting Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in Gaza, Lebanon, and even Syria. But never has Israel attempted such action in a country like Qatar, which has strong ties to the US and Europe. Why would Israel take such a bold risk now? Analysts suggest that Israel's leadership believes Hamas's external command structure is just as important as its fighters on the ground. Many of the decisions that led to the October 7th attack were reportedly made abroad, not inside Gaza. By striking in Doha, Israel sends a powerful signal. Geography will not protect Hamas leaders anymore, but this raises an immediate risk of escalation. Qatar could view this as a violation of its sovereignty and a direct challenge to its authority. If Israel acts openly, it may face condemnation not just from Qatar, but from the entire Gulf Cooperation Council, including powerful states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. On the other hand, if Israel acted covertly, Qatar may struggle to prove it, but will still face domestic and regional pressure to respond. The broader question is whether this strategy will actually weaken Hamas or backfire by rallying more regional support for the movement. What Israel views as tactical precision may be seen by others as reckless aggression. The consequences will depend heavily on how Qatar responds. Let us take a closer look at the potential fallout for Qatar itself. The country has carefully built its image as a diplomatic hub and global mediator, hosting the Taliban during negotiations with the United States, facilitating talks between rival factions, and funding humanitarian aid projects. These are all part of Qatar's foreign policy strategy. By striking in Doha, Israel threatens to unravel this carefully crafted role. Qatar's leadership now faces a difficult decision. If it continues to host Hamas leaders, it risks further Israeli operations and possibly even U.S. pressure. Washington may not openly support Israel attacking inside Qatar, but the U.S. has historically aligned with Israel's security objectives. This could leave Qatar in an awkward diplomatic position, squeezed between supporting Hamas and maintaining its Western partnerships. On the other hand, if Qatar decides to expel or distance itself from Hamas leadership, it may lose credibility in the Arab world and with Palestinian supporters. Qatar has long prided itself on being the voice of the disenfranchised. To suddenly abandon Hamas could be seen as betrayal. This tension is dangerous not just for Qatar, but for the entire Gulf region. If Doha becomes a battleground, its stability as an energy powerhouse could be threatened, and that would ripple into the global economy. The stakes here are not just political, they are deeply economic as well. Israel's gamble in Doha has essentially forced Qatar into the middle of the conflict in a way it has long tried to avoid. One of the most important aspects of this story is how other Middle Eastern powers will react. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt have all had complicated relationships with both Hamas and Qatar. While some of them view Hamas as a destabilizing terrorist group, They also see Israel as an aggressor that often acts without regard for Arab sovereignty. If Israel really did conduct an operation in Doha, it could trigger a strong wave of condemnation across the Arab world. At the same time, some Gulf leaders might quietly welcome pressure on Qatar. For years, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have criticized Doha's support for Islamist groups, accusing it of fueling extremism. If Israel weakens Hamas inside Qatar, these countries might view it as removing a thorn from their side. But publicly, they cannot be seen supporting Israel against a fellow Arab state. This creates yet another layer of complexity. Iran's reaction is also critical. Tehran has long supported Hamas militarily and ideologically. If Hamas leadership is under attack in Qatar, Iran may seek to rally regional allies like Hezbollah to retaliate against Israel. This could dramatically escalate tensions beyond Gaza and Lebanon. In short, the regional ripple effect of this alleged Israeli action is massive. Allies and rivals alike are now recalculating their positions. For Israel, it is about eliminating a threat. For Qatar and the rest of the region, it is about sovereignty, legitimacy, and the fragile balance of Middle Eastern diplomacy. The international response is another dimension we must consider. The United States, as Qatar's key ally, cannot ignore such a development. The largest American military base in the Middle East is located in Qatar, hosting thousands of U.S. troops. If Israel carried out an operation on Qatari soil, Washington would be dragged into the controversy, whether it wants to or not. The Biden administration has relied on Qatar as a mediator, especially in negotiations involving hostages and ceasefire deals with Hamas. If Doha is destabilized or loses credibility as a mediator, the U.S. will have fewer diplomatic tools to de-escalate future conflicts. This is why Washington may quietly pressure Israel to avoid further escalations inside Qatar. Meanwhile, Europe will also react strongly. Many European governments already criticize Israel's conduct in Gaza. An attack in Doha will only reinforce their concerns about Israel's disregard for international norms. The United Nations may also hold emergency sessions to address the violation of Qatari sovereignty, adding more diplomatic strain. At the same time, Israel has strong defenders who will argue that Hamas leaders cannot hide behind diplomatic protections. They will insist that targeting terrorists, no matter where they are, is justified. This division will deepen the already polarized debate about Israel's conduct in the war. Ultimately, the international stage is set for a fierce debate. Is this a necessary counterterrorism measure or a reckless violation of international law? The answer will depend on how much evidence emerges in the coming days. Another angle to explore is the potential intelligence operation behind such a move. Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, is one of the most active and effective in the world. Its history of carrying out overseas operations is long and controversial, from assassinations of Nazi fugitives to covert missions against Iranian nuclear scientists. If the reports about Doha are accurate, this could be another chapter in Mossad's shadow war. Striking inside Qatar would require extraordinary planning. Doha is one of the most heavily surveilled and secure cities in the region, hosting international conferences, global sporting events, and countless diplomats. For Israel to act there, it would either need inside help or an incredibly sophisticated covert strategy. This is why some analysts believe the attack may not have been a traditional military strike, but a covert operation such as a targeted assassination, cyber attack, or intelligence-led sabotage. If true, this raises yet another layer of complication. Did Qatar know about the presence of these Hamas leaders? Did foreign intelligence agencies share information with Israel? Or was this a unilateral action taken without anyone's consent? Each possibility comes with enormous consequences. In the end, whether it was a drone strike, a covert team, or some other method, The symbolism is what matters most. Israel is signaling to Hamas leaders that nowhere is safe, not Gaza, not Lebanon, not even Qatar. This psychological impact could shake Hamas's external leadership and force them to constantly look over their shoulders. But let us not forget the human side of this story. If Hamas leaders were indeed targeted in Doha, the question remains, what about civilians? Qatar's capital is not a war zone. It is a modern city full of residents, expatriates, and international visitors. Any operation in such an environment carries enormous risk for civilian casualties. Even the perception of danger could undermine Qatar's sense of security. This is where the ethical debate intensifies. Critics of Israel argue that it consistently disregards civilian safety in pursuit of its military goals. Supporters respond that Hamas leaders deliberately hide among civilians, making it impossible to strike them without collateral risk. The Doha situation highlights this moral dilemma on an even bigger stage. If Hamas leaders can be killed in a foreign capital, then ordinary people living in that city may begin to feel they are also targets. For Qataris, this is a frightening possibility. Their nation has prided itself on being stable, wealthy, and safe compared to neighbors dealing with war. An Israeli operation within their borders shatters that image and raises questions about the government's ability to protect its people. This human element, fear, uncertainty, and the collapse of perceived safety may end up being one of the most important outcomes of this development. Beyond politics, this is about people's lives and their sense of security. It will be very difficult for Qatar to restore that confidence if its capital becomes associated with international assassination plots. So what happens next? Much depends on the reaction from Qatar and the international community. If Doha decides to confront Israel diplomatically, we could see emergency meetings at the United Nations, stronger Arab League statements, and perhaps even new sanctions or boycotts pushed by regional states. Qatar may also choose to double down on its support for Hamas as a show of defiance. Alternatively, Doha could quietly shift its policy by reducing its visible support for Hamas and focusing more on humanitarian aid. It could try to re-establish itself as a neutral player. This would be a major shift, but it may be necessary to protect Qatar's long-term stability. For Israel, the risk is whether this move actually weakens Hamas or instead strengthens its image as a persecuted resistance movement. History shows that killing leaders does not always eliminate movements. Sometimes it galvanizes them. If Hamas manages to reorganize and retaliate, Israel may find itself in a deeper and more dangerous conflict. The United States and Europe will also play a role in shaping the outcome. If they pressure Israel to hold back, the escalation may stop here. But if they allow Israel to continue expanding its operations, we could be witnessing the start of a new phase in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one that spreads beyond Gaza into the very heart of the Gulf. In any case, this is not just a regional story. It is a global event with implications for diplomacy, security, and stability far beyond the Middle East.